thank you all for joining. We have an outstanding panel with diverse backgrounds, shedding perspectives on how to profit from technology innovations at the dawn of the 6G business today. We have Teresa Kotam, Chief Analyst from Omnipresence, Hanne-Stine Hellingby, Senior Researcher at Telenor Research, Jaroslav Toth, Senior Investment Advisor at European Investment Bank, and I'm Seppo Yrjölä, Principal Engineer at Nokia Enterprise. We'll start the session today with a short introductions to the theme by all the panelists. First, where is the demand? Shall we listening to the customer's voice of developers, the supply perspective, where does the operator create and capture value, and what does the investment community expect? Then we'll continue discussing the cross-cutting themes, key factors impacting the business and capturing value, and the role of collaboration and ecosystems in the 6G. And then open discussion to questions. Can I have the next slide, please? Let me start by providing some background on how to capture value from all the innovations the wireless engineering community are creating for the 6G. The convergence of wireless and internet technologies we are seeing will drive digital economy and automation across industries, and the focus of innovation will shift from individual technology or product towards innovation within platforms and ecosystems. To make sense of future digital economy, I think we must envision 6G system in a multidisciplinary way, from technology, business, and policy perspective, as an emerging general purpose platform. By that I mean being omnipresent, having potential for continuous technical improvements and enabling innovational complementarities across industry sectors. Mobile network operators have been the focal point of business, focusing on connectivity service provisioning, while networks seen as an enabling technology, an engineering platform, innovation platform with broad application. The ongoing convergence with the digital platforms from web-scale cloud service providers has triggered studies through the lenses of ecosystemic business models. My findings on capturing value from the technological innovations display the importance of appropriability, complementarity, standardization, and intellectual properties. Appropriability may be challenged due to the anticipated role of 6G as an upstream general purpose technology with strong network effect and spillover effects. Complementary assets and technologies lie at the core of ecosystem structured around several competing and intersecting digital platform layers. Platforms and standardization do allow modularization and autonomous innovation from stakeholders. On the other hand, they may challenge the ability of the ecosystem to generate systemic innovation within the highest value potential. Last but not least, the collaborative standard development process. It has enabled massive downstream innovation and application ecosystem, as we all know. Towards 6G, the current capture mechanism from lower layer radio access functions will be extended toward higher layers, such as augmented intelligence, human-machine interface, security, privacy, cybersecurity technologies. New innovations from these converging application domains will challenge the entire layered technology standardization and licensing model centered around radio access. The expansion of stakeholders and licenses will lead to an increasingly complex licensing landscape and necessitate a novel, more precise rule for licenses and licensing. It's essential that regulators protect these intellectual property contributions to motivate R&D incentives and investments by the developers of open, collaborative, enabling technologies. The business, as I see it, will be transformed beyond connectivity toward cloud-based delivery, software-led value creation, and a different type of network as a service, network as a code business model across telecommunication, internet, enterprise, industrial domains, and verticals. 6G networks will be designed, deployed, managed, and put into market, not only by the traditional communication service providers or mobile network operators, but there will be plenty of new stakeholders and different roles and actors, like local operators, cloud operators, neutral host, people from industry 4.0 verticals. Can I have the next slide, please? Looking forward to discussing with all of you and panelists in the coming panel on the impact of moving from supply-side engineering and innovation platforms towards demand-side platforms and innovation platforms, all the way to multi-sided transactional platforms. How to cope with ecosystem and open value configurations. That's the question we will address today in the panel, and hope active participation from all the audience by your questions. And next, let's see what is the demand, what customers want, what developers want. And Teresa, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Seppo. So very happy to be here at this session today. My name is Teresa Cottam, and I'm the Chief Analyst of Omnisperience. And it has to be said, having worked in this industry for a very long time, that the customer perspective has been somewhat lacking in the past, I think we have to admit. We did have a build it and they will come kind of mindset in this industry. And that's dangerous because although we're all highly educated, we've got, good intentions and we're very technical, it creates a kind of echo chamber where lots of similar people have similar ideas. And it also becomes quite organisational centric. So each of our organisations, it's got its own goals, like making a profit or operating in a certain way. And, those are what come to the foreground. Government recently caught on to the fact that digital is going to be so important in the future. So Europe's got its digital decade, and here in the UK, we're trying to keep up. We were going to do it by 2025. We're a bit slow, so we've put it back to 2030. I think it's fair to say that all our governmental organisations now believe that investment in networks is essential for the health of our economies and our societies in the future. But I would say they've got a bit of a pay it and they will come, or maybe subsidise it and they will come kind of mindset. Recently here in Nottinghamshire, we won a 5G test bed, and the government spent several £1 million putting 5G into the middle of Sherwood Forest. You'll recall Robin Hood and all that. Which was great because we had robot dogs and virtual reality for the tourists. But around that forest, there are loads of communities that have very poor connectivity and certainly no 5G. So you can imagine how they felt to see the trees getting 5G before they got it. And that's a really good example of a siloed kind of mindset. We have to become more customer centric, and that means we have to start to ask questions that really matter to customers. So things like, what do customers really need and want? What do they value? What are their priorities? And particularly, what can they afford? Often when we start asking these questions, we discover, much to our horror, that some of the things that they value are not the things that we had got in our minds. So, to customers, things like reliability are actually really important, perhaps more so than speed in some cases, and availability of network. It's no good having a super fast network down in London if you live like I do up in rural Nottinghamshire, because it's pretty theoretical. We want security. We want privacy protecting. We want the network and the technology to be usable and easy to use. And as I said, we want it to be affordable. And I think it's really important that when we start to think about 6G, we realise there's been a sea change in the customer mindset. There's a thing now called, some people call it the me economy. It's all about me. So customers want what they want it how they want it when they want it, in the form they want it, and they want to pay what they want to pay for it. So it's all about them, and it's all about, what they expect, not necessarily about, the old mindset of, well, we spent this much on networks and now we want this much profit. And the things that they value might be very different. They want to pay for outcomes that are meaningful to them, not technology that's meaningful to us. And this has a massive impact on our business. So it puts pressure on things like the old mindset of subscription packages. I mean, in Israel, they've already given up on this, and people don't have subscriptions there anymore. They don't have contracts. And, we've seen Netflix suffering because people have started rejecting subscriptions. So we're going to have to rethink that kind of model, as we will things like bundles. So customers are now, they don't want you to choose what's in your bundle, they want to choose, and they want to be able to unbundle and self-bundle. And when it comes to things like pricing models, they want pricing to be more flexible, they want it to be more personalised, they want it to be more affordable, as we've said, and they want it to be more value-based as well. I think that understanding the customer is absolutely essential because it reduces risk for us, and as well as increasing demand. So the old model meant that people like Seppo went away and developed all this fantastic technology, delivered it to people like Hannah, and there was a gap between those two before she decided to implement it. And then it was quite a long time before people like me started to use it. So there were gaps in demand. And when we talk about customers, the last idea that I'd like to leave you with is the fact that we mean all customers. We have to close the digital divide. We have to take everybody with us. And not just for ethical reasons. There are going to be really sound regulatory and perhaps even legal reasons why we have to do that. But there are really sound business reasons as well. So how do you do that? Well, we need to look at our charging models, as I said, experiment with some new models for what we do, things like freemium and ad-supported and sponsored and gifted data, maybe pay now, prepay, paying in small amounts, paying for time limited, access to the networks. There's lots to experiment with. And, we have to understand demand from our customers as well. And how do we do that? Well, there's passive ways. We've got vast amounts of data. We've got AI to help us sift through it. So we can see patterns and we can see what's happening. But we also have to stop having a monologue and start having a dialogue. We have to talk to our customers more. We have to listen and not just talk. As Seppo has just suggested, we're moving towards co-creation. We're having to acknowledge that everything's getting turned on its head. And customers are actually great at creating. If you look at a company like Lego, that's how it's made its millions over the years. There's so much pent-up creativity that we could release, and that will be great for us. So I think in summary, if we can get this right, it's good for our customers, it's good for our businesses, it's good for investors like Yaroslav over there, because we're going to de-risk it and reduce that gap. When I think about 6G, I'm really keen that it's going to be a more personalised technology. It's going to be more human-centric. I think it's going to be more democratic. And it's going to release the huge pent-up creativity that humankind actually has. And I think that's going to be good for everybody. I'm interested to hear what Hannah has to say from the operator side. Hannah.
Great, thanks, Teresa. Hannah-Stine, how the supply side, so how to bridge and match demand and supply. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Hannah-Stine Hallingby from Telenor Research, and I've been active in many European 5G and 6G or 5G and beyond projects last for many years now. So this is the background for my opinions here. So and my learning. So please, the next slide. So this is an illustration of how we see the telco revenues previous years and right now, and how our visions are for the future. We have had a decrease in revenues and stagnation, and here we are. So here we are in 2022, and we ask, we have 5G and we expected it to actually increase revenues, but it hasn't increased yet. So to address the question, how to monetize 5G and then later 6G, then I have gone back to well, 5 years and looked into what was it that 5G should address, which problems was it that 5G should address back then. The jobs to be done is condensed into two things after what I have found, and that is that 5G was expected to give us cost-efficient scaling, but also differentiation and innovation. And of course, these jobs to be done, they came from the problem that we were not able to be cost efficient and to differentiate. So 5G, to me, as an economist and social scientist, as I understand 5G is disaggregating technology. It is so it is about softwareization and being programmable, changing the technology into modules which then can be recombined. And it is this programmability and recombination that enable us to scale cost efficiently, but also to differentiate. And this is really important because 5G and later 6G have to address these problems to succeed, so that we eventually can see a huge telco growth, but also so that we eventually can address industries and societal challenges with these technologies. So then in 2022, where are we, and how can we then monetize these technologies? And well, one thing we do not have is that we don't have this differentiation yet. We have 5G as one slice. And so what I say is that what we need to do to monetize is actually to offer these public slices, which is differentiation. We do talk about private networks, but dedicated slices for private networks is not really about cost-efficient scaling. We need to offer these public slices, which can then address these needs from customers, which Teresa is talking about. We need to address needs from the health sector, from manufacturers, from transportation sectors, and these will then, because that's differentiation. These will add to the current revenues and give us the expected growth. However, it is in cost efficiency and scaling and differentiation, there is a built-in tension which the telcos have built into them today. And this is why network operators and customer service, communication service providers have to be split within the telco, so that one of them can cater to cost efficiency, the other can cater to the differentiation. And to do this with a commercial, professional interface between the two, that is also one thing we need to do. And then third thing, we need to chase openness, because as Seppo said, this is a systemic market with a lot of components which are dependent on each other. and to the easy recombination to cater both to cost efficiency and to innovation needs to be there. And operators, we have to ensure that this openness is there across vendors, across operators, across countries, across vertical sectors, so that we actually will get this. There are lots of competitive forces in this market that will try to turn this market into a de facto proprietary standard, and we cannot have that. So finally, also to follow up on Teresa, we cannot have a key account manager for each customer in 5G and 6G markets. We need to address them also in a cost-efficient way. So we need to cater to the customer journeys so that we understand where they want to be in contact with us and serve them efficiently in that contact point. So these are my learnings from working with 5G. And I think that these will only be reinforced when we go into the 6G era. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anne-Stine, for your very valuable insights and foresights. And then last but not least, who will pay all this, and what's the investment banker's view on an expectation? So Jaroslav, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Seppo. Thank you very much, everyone, for having us on the panel. So as Seppo already mentioned, my name is Jaro Todt, and I work at the European Investment Bank in the advisory department. I will explain a little bit later what our connection is to 5G and what kind of research we have done, but maybe just very shortly, I will mention that we work with projects or companies both in public and private sector, and we try to advise them on how to fund their operations. It can be anything from a hospital to a space company. So we work with a range of innovative companies. So I was asked to talk about the investor perspective. And as you all may know, the European Investment Bank, we have funded several operators or network providers, and also technology providers in recent years. So we do have experience with from our work with Bouygues, Nokia, Ericsson, etc. So I decided, given that the audience is a mixed one and not everyone has a finance background, I will try to set the scene a little bit and talk more about both about the infrastructure side and then also on the demand side, trying to connect a little bit with what Teresa was also talking about. So on the infrastructure side, I think it's safe to say that it's a very mature sector, very mature industry, and telecom infrastructure is considered similar to utilities, at least over the last decade or so. It's not really about if it should be funded, but it's more about when, with what parameters, and with what priorities it should be deployed, and in what regions. So that's definitely a positive. Another thing that's of very high relevance these days is that we seem to be heading into a high inflation environment, generally, at least for the coming months and years. And that's another advantage of infrastructure spending. Definitely your infrastructure assets, it can be anything from road to telecom, they're not a bad investment in a time of high inflation, because once you invest, you don't have very high running costs, and then you can capitalize on your revenues, and most importantly, your additional cost, marginal cost per additional customer, is very low. So that's another I guess good point or positive point. So this is just really to set the scene a little bit about how we perceive the sector. Where it gets interesting is to kind of connect it with what Hanne mentioned, was to look at the revenues. When we look at the investment, we try to see what will be the return, and if the funders will get their investment back. And so the basic components of revenues are, of course, demand and price. Now we know that this is an extremely competitive industry, and Teresa was also talking a little bit about the lack of differentiation, about people looking for, about operators competing with their bundles and what they would provide under various services and packages. But it's a sector that is very well known for downward price pressure. So the other element is then to look at demand, and this is where we at EIB Advisory, we try to do some extra work and try to analyze how the downstream, how the ecosystem could be developed. So we don't only need to finance the infrastructure, but we believe we also need to finance the companies and those subjects that will develop applications for using that technology. So we published a study in 2020. You can have a look at it here. I mean, okay, it doesn't work, but it's, if you Google 5G EIB report, you will find it. And so we were looking at 5G based applications and companies that are developing them. So you can find a little bit of everything there, anything from assisted driving, asset tracking, autonomous driving, all the way to augmented or virtual reality. And we try to understand if these companies developing applications for 5G, if they have difficulties obtaining financing. And that was the first task that we did, that we had. And the second one was to compare it to other regions in the world. So we found out that in Europe, this was a very difficult area, and many of these companies, they had troubles accessing finance. So one of the issues that we identified was that simply investors were not that familiar, and it was also a bit of a chicken and egg. These companies require very stable 5G networks, and it was not that much, very often not that much about speed, but it was very much about reliability and latency, which was the other two elements that a normal consumer doesn't, like it, on your mobile phone, you don't really need that much. But these critical applications, they need very high stability and very low latency. And so the investors are very much worried about availability of those networks. And another element was that it was the deployment of those networks was heterogeneous across Europe. So something that might work in Poland that might not work in parts of Germany, and something that might work in Germany might not work in France. And this is limiting in terms of the market that those companies can access. And what this means in reality, and that's the more important part, is that these companies are then limited also in terms of their valuation. So one of the interesting things that we observed was that if we compared an average company at a particular stage of life in Europe, and we compared it to a similar company developing a 5G based application in the US, we noticed that the valuation in the US was 3, 4, several times higher, which also means that those companies in the United States have much easier access to financing, and they raise substantially more capital. And if we look at the overall picture of both the 5G and more widely defined digital sector, we calculated that funding gap in Europe as between 4.5 and 6.5 billion euros, so a very, very substantial one. So if you want more information, go have a look at the report, and we also proposed several recommendations as how this could be addressed, combining public capital with private capital. And also I heard, I think it was Hannah who mentioned something about de-risking. This is precisely what we will have to do. And we also see a role for corporate VC capital in those structures. I don't want to take too much of your time because I'm running out, but have a look. How I would like to conclude this is that if we talk about investors, we are very aware that both the infrastructure and the ecosystem, meaning the deployment of those services, they need to be financed. It was the case for 5G. It will be the case for 6G as well, even though 6G is more than 5 years away. What I'm trying to say is maybe we can take some lessons from how it went with 5G and try to improve on it in 6G. I know that colleagues at the European Commission are working hard on that. They're trying to put some programs in place. And we in the investment community, we are aware of the necessity, and we are keen to work with you and explore how we could solve these issues. Thank you.
Thanks. Great insight, Jaroslav, on investment perspective. Then I can see that there's questions coming from the audience, and more, please. Any questions? Just use the questions and answers window to do that. But let's have a couple of questions based on these introductions, and I just try to calculate how many times we mention the word ecosystem, something like 27, and then I get lost. But value chain was not many times mentioned. So let's start with this from close to openness and ecosystemic view, moving from 5G towards the 6G. So how do you see that? What will be the key change in 6G ecosystem? will there be new players coming into the ecosystem? Who they might be? How do you see the competition? That I see that we clearly kind of collaborate and compete. Was it Hannestina? You mentioned this competitive landscape. So Hannestina, how about if you start elaborating a little bit? How do you see this competition that we in the ecosystem we compete and collaborate at the same time?
Yes. So just to put it simple, if you disaggregate the technology, right? If you take one hierarchical technology, which is hard coded together, and then split it into bits and pieces, right? And then and you throw it up, and then it has to be recomposed to solutions, right? And these are actors, these are firms who provide different parts of these technologies together to a customer, and they are they don't have control of the supply chain anymore. They are interdependent in creating value for a customer, and they have to share the revenues that the customer will pay in this market. And this and I mean, this is a characteristic of a systemic market. But when the technology also then is disaggregated, then the technology actually reinforces this type of a market, the ecosystemic market. So this interdependency that 5G and 6G enable is what is changing.
Seppo, I'd like to add something to that if I can.
Go ahead. I was about to ask about how do you see the customers and developers' role in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about what Hannah said as well is that we tend to think in silos in telecoms traditionally, and what we're looking at is the definition of a customer is just going to get exploded and completely change, because we tend to see customers as something that we give something to and then they use it. And we're talking now about, every customer could be, a partner as well as a customer, that they're going to create things using the connectivity or the other assets that we're delivering. And so our relationship is really going to change with our customers. And the way, and that changes everything, their expectations of us. I mean, we've been in some ways worse partners than we have, dealing with customers even. So we're really going to have to change the way that we partner. It's going to become a lot more dynamic. And I think, that's quite exciting, but it does bring up a whole load of challenges in terms of customer relationship management, partner relationship management, which are going to have to come together, and how then we monetize these things as well. So I think it's really exciting times, but, I can see on the business side, there's going to be some really interesting, changes as well of mindset coming. I think Hannah's nodding as well. I think you can see that on the horizon as well, Hannah.
Well, if you ask me, absolutely, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, there is a lot of uncertainty in this market moving forward. So that's why we have to start to collaborate and trust each other in this value creation and try things out, right? But we are commercial entities, so there will be competition, and this dynamic will be there, and we have to handle it.
And we don't have to be scared of failure, because by now we should have learned that lesson from Silicon Valley, that, failing fast, trying things, and okay, it doesn't work out, and then we move on, is the way to go. We can't come at this with that old-fashioned, 5 nines mindset of trying to get everything right, because nobody's got all the answers. This is very much a try it out and see what works and then move on if it doesn't kind of scenario, I think, as well. Experimentation. And and accepting that we won't get everything right all of the time.
Jaroslav, there are actually a couple of questions from the audience to you about the valuation, and how do you see the venture capitalist and startup community and application developers, what's their role be in 6G ecosystem? As you started the 5G, and so far we have seen pretty kind of heavy investment and infrastructure, even you called 5G as an utility, but how do you see this changing towards 6G?
I will try to combine several questions that I saw there, because it's a very, what you have to see is that in investors, we are very simple creatures. So we will not understand the technology to the same extent than dedicated engineer, etc. So what we are trying to look at is simply is return. And of course, I like the question of that Mitch Tseng asked, what will be the true value that 6G systems will bring? We've already, with the transition from 4G to 5G, we have seen this question. We have seen this question asked so many times, saying, surely we are not doing this. Surely we are not moving from 4G to 5G to download that Netflix movie 10 times faster or 100 times faster. Surely this is not the reason. And the average consumer does not realize that there's another layer, which is the whole IoT element. There is a reliability, and there's the whole super low latency, which is extremely important for those breakthrough applications. So I think that what investors will want to see is moving from 5G to 6G, and I don't have the answer. What will be we know that 5G should be already good enough for most supercritical applications. So we need to also see what are the business models that will be enabled with 6G, because that will constitute the demand for services. So I think that's what the whole, I guess, investment community wants to see, because that's the only way how we can evaluate what will be the market for the technology and what will be the demand.
Thanks. And to continue, there's a great question from Oksana on how do we see the role of regulation, and if we expand this to standardization and policies and regulations. As we'll know, our industry is heavily regulated, and in regional level and in nation level, and then as well we have I think all kind of aiming towards global harmonized standards to have a scale and replicability. So who would like to comment on this regulatory topic? Go ahead, Teresa.
I think that this is where, again, we would need to work with governments, because I tend to call net neutrality the communism of the internet. The idea that everybody has to have the same service. We have to have fairness. We can't have anti-competitive behaviour, but we have lots of laws and rules in place that say, Hannah isn't allowed to slow down Amazon so that Netflix can have a better service. That's anti-competitive. But we don't have laws and rules that says that, Yaroslav can only drive a Mini because that's all that Seppo can afford. We have to be allowed to have differentiation of service, and for people to pay extra for that, but it has to be done fairly. So I think there's a question of, getting that regulatory environment right. I don't think in the industry we're in the business of being unfair. We already do some differentiated service by its nature, because obviously an email doesn't have to get there as fast as some real-time video, which has got real sort of it's much more cost sensitive. So we've already got a bit of that going on. I think we need to grow up a bit now and sort of recognise that if service providers are not allowed to develop models around differentiated quality of service fairly, then it's really going to make it harder for them to continuing to justify investing in all of their stuff. And more importantly, customers want to be able to pay more for things that matter to them as well. So I think it's the regulators actually realising and starting to think about the demand is there. We don't want communism of the internet, but we do want fairness. And so how can we go about sort of creating a regulatory environment that supports our future business models?
Anna-Stina, how do you see it from the operator point of view? How do you see the regulation? Is it kind of an enabler? Is it framing your business opportunities, or is it both?
Well, network operators didn't want network net neutrality, right? Because we wanted to dominate the access network, but we have it, and the net neutrality is there to avoid dominance of access or ISP internet providers. So if you but I agree with Teresa. We need differentiation. So one shoe does not fit everybody, right? But the good thing about net neutrality, seen from a customer point of view or a third-party point of view, is that we will avoid dominance of a few parties, right? We don't want huge platforms to dominate the future 5G or 6G network. We don't want one or two vendors or providers to dominate the future network. We want, and also not operators. We want competition and diversity. So we need regulation in that respect, I think, or competition laws or whatever. But we don't want the net neutrality that that hinders these investment cases, business cases from the vertical sectors actually to happen, right?
Jaroslav, any?
If I just realized I skipped over one question that was actually directly addressed to me, which was from Parth Amin, and I apologize, I didn't catch that earlier. It was about the valuation perspective, whether a startup offering value-added services using 5G will be valued more or less than a startup enabling 5G private network.
Exactly. Yeah.
I decided to answer to go to this question, even though I don't have the answer, but I thought it would be at least good to try to answer. Ultimately, when you talk about valuation, it depends at which stage of the company already is, and if they already have customers, or if they really are developing, if it's really seed or Series A financing. When at those stages, the valuation will very much be driven by the maximum revenue potential in the future. Do we think it can really be explosive? Do we really think that they could become a unicorn? What is the upside potential of that company? From my very simple perspective, it's hard to say. I would probably say that someone who is offering very reliable AR or VR applications, it's probably not that difficult to scale that business up. So that would then support the hypothesis that Parth Amin mentioned. So that could be it's easy to imagine a scenario where that would be the case. On the other hand, if there's a huge demand for private networks, company-based, etc., then the opposite might be true. But I would say, indeed, intuitively, it seems like it would be easier to scale up a business to that's offering value-added services. So from that perspective, intuitively, it might be true. Sorry, that's all I wanted to add. Seppo, you're muted.
Sorry, a great question to continue from the audience, that like we discussed, that how do we define ecosystem? How do we define communication service providers or operators in the future? And there's a question about, or comment that, how do we see the role of over-the-top providers and then versus the infrastructure providers in the future? And Hannes-Tine, would you like to comment on how do you see the role of operators in the future? Will there be different type of operators in the ecosystem? I mean, different roles and different actors. How do you see this changing?
Yes. So, of course, 5G and 6G means that someone will have to invest in the infrastructure locally, right? So you will always have the infrastructure operator or the network operator, and also spectrum is localized. So you will have local operators. Of course, you can see that that they can come across countries, but you will have them. So from my point of view, at least, but then is the communication service provider or the digital service provider, which are defined roles in the standards. They I mean, the whole idea of 5G and 6G is that they can source resources freely across operators, across countries, continents, etc., etc. So those roles can change very much the next 10 years or 20 years. We could have, yeah. So yeah, I'll leave it like that.
Thank you. And while waiting for hopefully more questions from the audience, we as well promised to discuss about forces impacting the business opportunities from this value capture or value sharing perspective. So how do you see that outside of this traditional telecom and mobile communication industry? What are the key kind of trends and forces impacting the business moving towards 6G? Whether they are kind of strong trends with known impact, or maybe uncertainties or kind of weak signals, as we are living in a VUCA world with a lot of uncertainties. Jaroslav, how do you see this from investment point of view? That how do you see what are the key kind of mega trends or uncertainties moving towards 6G around 2030 when doing investment decisions?
It will be very much an investor needs to be convinced that there will be specific new use cases that will justify the additional investment. I think that's the, well, we don't, but that would definitely facilitate the decision, because we need to be convinced about revenue generation abilities of I guess 6G or the infrastructure that would enable it, because I'm only hypothesizing, but I'm assuming that going from 5G to 6G might be even more expensive than going from 4G to 5G, because we are going down 1,000 times in latency, etc. So those probably technologically it will require maybe even completely different fiber connections between towers and the whole ecosystem. So I think this will be the challenge to see what are the business models and what is then the business case for 6G. I think I cannot be more concrete than that, I think, at this stage.
Hannes-Tine, Teresa, what's your favorite trend or uncertainty?
Well, my favorite, the most critical trend is, of course, the climate crisis. And moving from 5G into 6G, it is not only cost efficiency, but energy efficiency that is really important, that will affect but the use cases, the business cases from the vertical sectors also, but also how operators address this. We have to reduce our energy or fossil fuel footprint.
That is actually a very good point, if I may react to that. And I know that my colleagues, so the EIB, we are a climate bank, and this is very much some of the considerations. And I know that when we funded the research, it was one of the considerations. What is the efficiency? What is the CO2 impact per unit of transmitted data, etc. The counter argument to that will be, it's true that 6G, we're assuming it will be much more energy efficient, but at the same time, it might induce consumer to transmit much more data. So we will then in the end need to see where we end up with that. And but yeah, the energy efficiency is definitely a key component to decision taking. Yeah.
So we could go back to, the cost of the energy as well. So electricity prices are soaring at the moment. And, as a business, yes, we want to be greener, but also just from a cost point of view, it's one of our biggest costs. And so we need to manage that cost so that we can, give customers connectivity at an affordable price, because otherwise our prices will have to go up as well. I think one of the things that interests me is the change in customer behaviour. And the fact that customers don't just want to be passive consumers of connectivity anymore. They really want to roll up their sleeves and start to they want to open the black box up and the magic that we've perhaps been keeping to ourselves for so long. and people want to see inside what we've got, and they want to play with it as well. We can't just keep our toys to ourselves anymore. But the other side of it is, which is quite interesting, is an increase in what I would call neo-Ludditery, which is really strange to me. But there are lots of people who are really backing away from technology. And you saw that a lot during the lockdown. People believing that, 5G spread COVID, which is kind of clearly ridiculous, but some people did. But more interestingly, a lot of young people who we always think are going to be the engine and are going to drive demand, actually stepping away from social media or going back to, offline pursuits, and believing that technology has become too intrusive in their lives. So I think we have to understand why customers are behaving like they are. We can't just assume that demand will just continue to grow in a nice linear fashion, because we're seeing some really interesting trends out there. And another thing I think that's very interesting is the global local thing that Hannah touched on, and scale as well, big and small. So we talked a lot about big businesses, but I mean, this is going to be a bonanza for the very smallest businesses. And I think, we're already seeing that. We call them nano businesses, which are basically these monetized side gigs that everybody seems to have these days, where they're running a business from home. They might be selling on Amazon or on eBay, or they might be an influencer and making videos, or coding games or whatever, but everybody seems to have a gig going on, or they're driving for Uber or what have you. So everyone's becoming, a business owner and running businesses, which is quite interesting. So the future might not be mega businesses. It might actually be lots and lots and lots of smaller businesses. Young people don't want to work for businesses anymore. Big businesses are actually having a lot of trouble recruiting them. They want to work for themselves, and they like that freedom, and we're giving them the platform to be able to do that. And I think on the global local side, somebody has to run the world's backbone, clearly. But we're also seeing lots of co-ops sort of coming to market, where people, maybe it's a local authority that wants to run its own network, or it's a corporation and then allows access to people. Or we're seeing in the UK, school networks and Wi-Fiing that out and letting the community share it, or letting children share, use the school network when they go home, because maybe they're not very wealthy, and that's the way to keep them connected. So to the earlier point of, are we going to see different players? I think at the access layer, absolutely. And I think that mix is going to get more complicated, and why shouldn't it be? I mean, if people want to take responsibility for customer service, and they want to buy from us wholesale, and then they want to create a little business around that, those pesky customers, they can handle them, and maybe they're better placed to do that. So yes, I do think there's an interesting thing to think about there, about big and small and global and local, and how this is all going to play out, and whether people are completely convinced by digitalization, or whether you're going to see lots of young people switching off and going back to board games rather than playing these massive online games that they've been doing for the last few years. I mean, even reading books, I don't know whether you noticed, but the physical books have actually resurged during the lockdown, and people have stopped using so many digital books. So we need to pay attention to that and understand why that's happening, and understand that change in demand.
Hannestina, Jaroslav, how do you see this local global? I think that's a very interesting theme, that how we are able to scale down to very small or even private area networks and businesses. And then on the other hand, in 6G, we talk about satellites or airborne communication and space communication. So how do you see this local and global scaling and scoping?
Yeah, it's a challenging question. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it is locally. If you are going to invest in local network, we probably will have to have a local business case that is positive to do that somehow. So that's one comment. To invest on a global basis, or on a large, that's a different story. That's more like traditional network operators, I guess, that you have to find revenues for your investments in network and infrastructure. But when it comes to being people, employers being more independent, and wanting to work in a different way. It might, if we get this, open technologies where licensing and proprietary software is and patenting is not that important anymore, we might get a lot of people who offer their labor to consult and code and support and enable others in the future. But we are not there yet, I think, but it may come, and that is, local.
And we can learn a lot from each other as well, Seppo. I mean, in Scandinavia, they've been sharing networks and doing local networks for years. And it's something we're now looking at in the UK and saying, what can we learn from Scandinavia? Because our ability to actually fibre out into our rural areas hasn't been very good. There's a lot of overbuild going on. And so we're looking at their model and how they manage to minimise overbuild by sharing and cooperating, rather than one player trying to cover the entire country, and then another player tries to do that, and then you get, a wasted investment, really.
One thing I would add is trying to stick to what I know, being the financing side, is I definitely see it as a positive because it gives the fact that we go smaller and local. It gives the opportunity to access different sources of financing, because then we are in a way expanding that. The funding large infrastructure is a very structured process that is very legally challenging. It works only with select few, and you need very specialized investors and all of that, and you use specific funding instruments for that. It's almost like a closed market. It's a very specialized market. Then if we look at local solutions, that opens up, in theory, the access to other sources of financing and local sources of financing. And also, you simply do not have to wait until, if you work in a specific region, you don't have to wait until 6G or 5G gets to you, and you can use fiber connection first and then build around it. So there's one thing. Seppo, you mentioned space and drones. I don't know about I did look into some space sector solutions. Maybe drones are more realistic, probably due to latency issues, I would assume. Even with low flying satellites, you probably would have latency that would not work with 6G, maybe more with 5G. But to me, everything that's innovative, it sounds fun, and it looks like an interesting way forward.
It was great sharing insights and foresights with you, and thanks for the audience for the great questions and comments. And I think we have just a couple of minutes left, so please share with me in one sentence your 6G vision about what's your worldview or myth or something, what 6G will feel alike.
I think it will be completely convergent. I think we can't talk about mobile as being a silo anymore, because we've been talking about fibre, and the two have to work together, and satellite has to work with that as well. So business convergence, so that our operators, Hannah, all the inside of the operator works together and functions as a whole and isn't siloed anymore. And I think we have to open up the black box so that customers, are more part of this, that it's democratized. And as I said earlier, my vision is that we have a far more customer-centric technology that we're going to deliver that is business ready. So people like you, Seppo, no longer can you just deliver as nice radios and, network equipment boxes. You're going to have to deliver as infrastructure that's business ready. So, our operators can start making money from day one, and our customers can start using it and paying for it.
Thanks. Hannes-Tine.
Yes, being everywhere, serving anyone, anytime. 6G.
Great. Jaroslav, your vision?
Probably, I would say really even stronger collaboration, stronger ecosystem probably will be needed. It kind of ties to what to one of the questions that we received. So it will be not only about building the infrastructure, but actually really having sandbox environments, really combining operators and actual users, people and companies developing applications. So it will be, I think it will have to be logically, it will be a much more close ecosystem, I think.
Great. Fully agree. And something to add about the one word I have in mind is kind of empowerment, that empowerment all the ecosystem stakeholders, customers, users, developers, prosumers, and kind of thinking that more we share, more we gain as an industry moving forward towards 6G. So thank you for listening and thank you for your time.